Well, we want to tell you about this. Did the British government lie about protecting civilians in Iraq? This is true, according to an expose from The Guardian and Airwars. Now, before we get into this story, though, I want to point out something that I missed last week. Airwars is the same organization that told us, and we reported last week, that the U.S. had bombed civilians in Somalia. And so we covered that story with reporting from this group, but this is not necessarily an unbiased group. It definitely is a damning report, and I think we should look at it. But I want to just say, who is this group and why are they telling us this? Because we have to sort of be critical about everything. Now, Airwars is a nonprofit watchdog that tracks civilian harm in Middle Eastern countries. They say that they don't accept government donations, but their website indicates that they have accepted government grants, and they are also funded by George Soros. Here is where they admit that funding comes from the Open Society Foundation, supporting their work in Iraq, Syria, and Libya. Well, the Open Society Foundation is founded by George Soros. Take a look at this. This is their homepage, where they say as much. And if you search the grants that they have awarded, you can see that they've given hundreds of thousands of dollars in previous years since 2016, at least, to Airwars. In fact, Open Society Foundation does not receive funding directly from the government, but some of their programs do receive government grants and government partnerships. So indirectly, by working with Open Society Foundation, Airwars does have connections to government funding. So I think it's important because my spidey sense went up at the mention of this conflict. We still should go through the report, but as Caitlin Johnstone just last week reminded us, that we really should not be just sort of blindly accepting what think tanks say, because so many of them have conflicting dollars coming in. Here's the tweet she posted last week. Empire-funded think tanks are not valid sources, and it is not acceptable for journalists to cite think tanks funded by governments in the military-industrial complex as sources of information or expertise on matters of national security or foreign affairs. That doesn't mean that we're going to throw this report away. That means that we're going to keep it there, know who is connected to it, and then ask relevant questions. Okay?
Okay.
All good?
Yeah.
So the report from Airwars and The Guardian publishes reports from Freedom of Information requests showing that the UK government did harm civilians in drone attacks while fighting in Iraq between 2016 and 2017. Well, why was the UK there in the first place? Because the US invited them along while they were fighting ISIS in Syria and Iraq. The UK had previously claimed that they fought a perfect war against the Islamic State, which is a term I very much object to. There is no perfect war unless it's the war that was avoided, in my opinion. But these newly published documents show from government reports that they knew that they had hit civilians, and that there were attacks that could have been averted. Now, I'm going to play this video. It is 5 minutes, so I want to ask you to be patient as you stick with it, because it will lay out exactly how these strikes on civilians affected civilians and how they actually could have been averted. So stick with it. I'll see you in 5 minutes.
In 2016, 6-year-old Iraqi Taiba Yunus was killed by a missile dropped by the US-led coalition. 6 years after the incident, Airwars and The Guardian located Taiba's family. We visually reconstructed their testimonies and compared them to newly declassified coalition documents detailing the airstrike. This is the story of the mistakes that led to her death, a single airstrike and a pattern of failure which killed thousands of civilians. November 29th, 2016. For months, Islamic State militants and coalition-backed Iraqi forces have been fighting in Mosul, Iraq's second largest city. The fighting has reached the residential neighborhood of Al-Ilam, home to the Yunus family.
طبعا هذا الشارع سيطروا عليه هنا من سيطروا عليه هنا. هذا الشارع الذي هو صار خط الصد الذي بيننا بين الدواعش وبين الجيش.
18,000 feet above, a coalition drone is scanning the streets. Pentagon documents released to the New York Times included a civilian casualty report on the same date, corresponding to the street of the Yunus family house. The document contains a chat log between surveillance analysts, aircraft ground support, and the mission commander, as well as a written description of the drone footage. At 15:42, after an analyst observes ISIS fighters firing from the roof of a building, the mission commander requests a strike. At 15:47, the strike is approved. In the minutes after the approval, the analysts appear to expand their monitoring, tracking multiple men coming and going on the road. On 5 separate occasions, they announce they have lost sight of their target. Shortly before 4 p.m., Inam Yunus decides to take her 3 children from her father's home to her husband a few streets away. Her 6-year-old daughter Taiba doesn't want to leave. At 16:05, the aircraft ground support reports that they have lost the militants they were approved to strike. Somewhere between then and 16:10, the analysts identify a group of 4 adult males on the sidewalk. The men are carrying a possible rifle. Our review of the chat log found that there is no confirmation of the weapon or that this group were the same militants that they had been approved to target. At 16:10, 23 minutes after the initial approval, the missile is fired. Despite the operators losing track of the initial target, no new approval is requested. This appears to be in breach of the coalition's rules of engagement. Inam and her family have just left their home, watched by 3 male family members, including her father. It is possible that the group of alleged militants the strike was targeting were in fact these relatives. They walk past the door of the neighbouring house. Inam and her father said that there were no fighters within 30 metres. At 16:10, a surveillance analyst calls splash as the missile explodes. Immediately afterwards, another analyst says civcas, meaning civilian casualties, adding, at the last moment, 2 children exited the building.
راحت هيك بعيد عني بس هي يعني تباوع علي وأنا باوع عليها حسيتها يعني عايشة مو ميتة. طيبة صارت يعني شلون أني هيجي وهي هيجي مقابلي حسيت طيبة إنه قلبي علمني إنه طيبة ماتت.
Our analysis shows that the weapon used was likely a Hellfire, an anti-tank air-to-ground missile, fired from a Reaper drone. Experts say that during what is usually a 30 to 45-second flight, a Hellfire missile can be redirected to a safe point, identified before launch if civilians are at risk. The missile can be diverted up to 2 or 3 seconds before impact, although satellite signals can add a 1 to 2 second delay. Although it is a residential area, there was a clearing 150 metres from the house. Taiba and her family walked around 12 metres, which would take an estimated 8 to 10 seconds. The coalition's post-strike review of the drone footage concluded Inam and the children were visible before the strike. It is unclear why the analysts did not notice them earlier. The coalition has not declared which nation conducted the strike. Documents released to Airwars under the Freedom of Information Act showed the United Kingdom conducted a strike which corresponds to the date, area, and munition used. A coalition review recommended that the drone operators be sent for further training on the rules of engagement and positive identification of targets. The Target Executive Authority was urged to review the amount of time operators have to conduct a strike without seeking reapproval. The Ministry of Defence refused to confirm or deny its involvement. Full investigations were opened in only 12% of confirmed reports of civilian casualties between 2014 to 2019 in Iraq and Syria. Inam lost both legs, while her other children were badly injured.
أريد يعوضوني. هو ماكو شيء يتعوض بس أريد يعوضوني يعني إنه يوفروا لي حياة مريحة اللي والأطفالي والزوجي.
So this shows that the UK government has actually documented it, and you see this in a paper trail that says it hit civilians, and that they knew it at least in enough time to have diverted that missile, but did not. And they have documented it. There are reports confirming at least 32 other previously unreported deaths. And here is the map that Airwars is giving us of where some of these attacks went. And their summary, it says, now 2 sets of newly declassified documents led us to identify 8 more strikes which may have been conducted by the UK. In these cases, the coalition accepts that at least 32 civilians were killed, and through Freedom of Information Act requests, Airwars obtained the dates and locations of the 1,166 weapons released in which the UK claimed its strikes killed or harmed ISIS militants. Now, they were able to look at the reports of these killings and also corroborate that those strikes happened on those dates and that the UK was the one flying these missions. Here's what a spokesperson for the Ministry of Defense said to The Guardian when they published this. They said, there is no evidence or indication that civilian casualties were caused by strikes in Syria and Iraq. The UK always minimizes the risk of civilian casualties through our rigorous processes and carefully examines a range of evidence to do this, including comprehensive analysis of the mission data for every strike. So, are we to believe that the UK may have accidentally killed some civilians, but this is the extent of it? Or is this a report showing us just one piece of what is probably a much bigger puzzle? We talked about that as a tactic earlier in the week when we talked about the Graphica report that was mentioned in the Twitter files as publishing disinformation through Twitter or suppressing conversation around COVID, but then turned around and gave us a report about how the Pentagon is guilty of psychological operations, even though they're funded by the Pentagon. So it would seem this is sort of part of this, you know, if I'm extrapolating here, of course, but this agency does have connections to government funding, and now it's telling us the government is doing bad things. So can we have full confidence that they're telling us everything? Or should we just say, or is this leading us to say, yes, a few, you know, Iraqi kids were killed. It's necessary. We feel good about it now because we know the government will be more transparent now because they've told us. So carry on. Right?
Right. Well, as Madeleine Albright has said, that, you know, that's just part of the game, right? The killing of children in this, like, that's just fine.
Other people's children.
It's other people's children.
Who
it's fine.
Don't look like us.
Right. Brown kids. That's collateral damage. That's going to be fine when she's asked.
I mean, they're poor anyway. They live these lives, you know, covered in flies is what we're supposed to think. It plays right into this ability because you can stomach the pain of other people if they are the other, if they are put away from you. You can't see them. You can't, you know, you can't understand their language. It almost doesn't matter to us. And
and remember,
go ahead.
I was going to say, remember when Michael Moore was chasing after like congressmen and senators saying, hey, you going to send your kids to war? And they're just like, you know, blowing him off like he's some conspiracy theorist idiot because he's asking such a question.
Yeah, because no one in Congress has kids, you know, kids fighting these wars.
Because people in Congress have great grandkids now. They're too old. So true. Now, again, the question is, you know, what are we supposed to take? What are we being invited to see here? And are we being invited to see the whole piece of the pie? And, you know, my point in pointing out the conflicting funding here is that probably this is not it. And I don't think anybody thinks like, oh, okay, you know, they were dropping drones. The Obama administration ramped up the drone program. Probably a lot of people were killed, but we know the extent of it now. It's over. That's okay. You know, we'd be naive to not think that that is going to continue to happen. This is a reminder that people die in war and not just soldiers. And we should not be stomaching that then. We should not be stomaching that now. But on this, you know, the week that this report comes out, the British military gets this big public relations hit today because Prince William made this surprise visit to the Ukraine-Polish border in order to meet the troops stationed there. Here are a few pictures of him meeting British and Polish troops stationed near the Ukrainian-Polish border and praising their cooperation and support of the people of Ukraine and their freedom. His job looks awful. Like to just sort of sit there as a figurehead in order to punctuate. They're not supposed to be political, first of all, the royals. And here they're clearly taking a side.
You got to think of the propaganda, the optics of this, right? On the same day that Boris Johnson is being grilled about lockdown hypocrisy, right?
Yeah.
In testifying yesterday in that. He's there so that the British press will be focused on the prince going to Ukraine instead of Boris Johnson having to deal with lockdown testimony, right?
Right.
And because Boris Johnson is the guy, of course, who was pushing actively for no peace in Ukraine and additional money and weapons into Ukraine. So we can't have him looking bad. So Prince, go to the border. Let's get some press coverage.
This picture here, can you find the one where he's talking to the lady in the Adidas tracksuit? This one just looks like he's sort of furrowing his brow and nodding like, yes, you're telling me things to which I have no effect on, but I'll stand here and validate them. And I just think to myself, like, what a sham this is. This is a charade to participate in this. And
You'll use these people as photo ops.
Exactly.
Right.
Because Prince William is a fun character to look at. You know, he has personal intrigue. So I guess, are we supposed to think that these casualties of war were a thing of the past and it won't happen anymore? And Prince William is there to make it smile and make it look nice and humanitarian. I suppose that's what we're being invited to feel and think here. But let us know what you actually really feel and think about this in your comments below.
Why doesn't he go to the eastern border? That would be more interesting. I'd like to see him go to the eastern part and instead of the Polish border. Maybe he's just getting ready so when Poland takes over the western part of Ukraine and annexes that and now rolls that into Polish territory, they're just kind of prepping everything, getting ready for that.
I suppose. And, we've seen plenty of high-profile people go actually into Kiev. They absolutely could, blow those air raids and have him run around. That would also serve their...
would actually serve their agenda better, right?
Yeah, I mean, they've done it with Angelina Jolie and Sean Penn and President Biden and,
Yeah.
So they could. Why not? They just stopping short, I guess.
Thank you so much for watching this segment here at Redacted. We are live every day at 4 p.m. Eastern Time, trying to share the stories that the mainstream media will not cover. You should also come over and join our community of Redacted Rebels over at redacted.inc. That's our private locals community where we can share exclusive content that we simply cannot share here on YouTube. Come over and join the rebellion together right now by going to redacted.inc. We'll see you next time.